This woman was considered the most beautiful young woman in Paris in 18... And then, she disappeared from the face of the earth. 25 years later, the police broke into her mother's attic and found this. A skeletal carcass weighing 25 kilograms, living on top of a mountain of feces and rotting food scraps from 2 decades. The scariest part, she was not kidnapped by a stranger. The monster who did this was her own mother. To understand how a human being can be reduced to a caged animal in the heart of the City of Lights, we need to walk through the elegant streets of Poitiers, France. The Monnier family was not just any family. They were the elite, social royalty. Madame Louise Monnier was a respected widow, known for her charitable works and religious piety. She even won an award from the Committee of Good Works. Her son, Marcel, was a law school graduate, a man of the law, and her daughter, Blanche Monnier. Blanche was the jewel in the crown, described as very gentle, graceful, and cheerful. She had large, expressive eyes, and a beauty that attracted suitors from all over the region. She was 25 years old, had her whole life ahead of her, and the world at her feet. And then, in the blink of an eye, Blanche vanished. She simply evaporated. The family, désolé, told society that Blanche had gone to a boarding school in the United Kingdom or Scotland, and that, due to a sudden illness, she decided to cut contact with the world. As years passed, the story changed. The mother and brother began saying she had died. They staged the mourning. Madame Monnier wore black. People on the street consoled her. Poor Madame Monnier, losing a daughter so young and so beautiful. Time, as it always does, covered the mystery with dust. Life in Poitiers went on. 25 years passed. 25 Christmases. 25 summers. An entire generation was born and grew up without ever seeing Blanche's face. But on May 23, 1901, the Attorney General of Paris received a letter. There was no sender. The handwriting was hurried, perhaps nervous. The content of the letter was short, but it carried a weight that would make the attorney's stomach turn. It read, "Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved and living on a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth." The police were skeptical. Madame Monnier, the benefactor, the widow of a respected local official. It was impossible. Accusing a woman of that social stature of such a barbaric crime was unthinkable. But the law is the law, and such a specific complaint could not be ignored. A group of officers was sent to the residence at number 21, Rue de la Visitation. When they arrived, the house seemed normal. Madame Monnier did not want to let them in, claiming to be unwell, but the police insisted. They searched the ground floor. Nothing. They searched the first floor. Nothing. The house was clean, organized, the symbol of bourgeois perfection. But then they went up to the second floor. There was a smell. A faint smell at first, but one that became unbearable as they approached a locked door at the end of the hallway, leading to the attic. The smell was not just old. It was a sweet and rotten smell of excrement, spoiled food, and death. The officers ordered the door to be opened. No one answered. They broke the lock. The door opened with a creak, and the smell that came out was so violent that the officers recoiled, covering their noses with handkerchiefs. The room was plunged in total darkness. The windows were boarded up and covered by heavy curtains and decades of dust. One of the officers, holding his breath, ran to the window and tore down the curtains, which disintegrated in his hands. Sunlight entered that room for the first time in a quarter of a century, and what the light revealed made men hardened by their profession vomit. In the corner of the room, on a straw bed that had turned into a damp paste, was something that looked like a skeleton covered by a thin layer of gray skin. She was completely naked. The hair, which was once Blanche's pride, was now a tangled mass reaching down to her knees, mixed with food scraps and feces. Cockroaches ran across the bed. Worms moved in the leftovers of crusts of bread and fish scattered on the sheet. The air was so unbreathable that they could not stay in the room for more than a few minutes. The creature on the bed turned her head slowly toward the light. She was terrified. She weighed exactly 25 kilograms. That was Blanche Monnier. The beauty of Poitiers was 50 years old now, but she looked like a 1,000-year-old mummy that still breathed. She had not seen the sun for 25 years. She had not spoken to another human being besides her jailers for 25 years. While the police tried, carefully, to wrap that fragile body in a blanket to take her to the hospital, Madame Monnier was in the living room, drinking coffee, sitting in her velvet armchair, as if nothing was happening. The coldness was absolute, but the question screaming in everyone's head was, WHY? What could make a mother condemn her own daughter to this living hell, right above her head, while she lived a life of luxury and charity downstairs? The answer is so futile it makes the crime even more heinous. Blanche had committed a single crime. She fell in love. And it was not with a rich prince. It was with an older lawyer, broke and, worst of all, for Madame Monnier, a Republican. In the next chapter, we will dive into the details of the captivity, how she survived eating scraps, and the trial that stopped France. If you have a strong stomach, keep watching. The true face of evil wears pearls and goes to mass on Sundays. To understand the depth of Madame Louise Monnier's cruelty, we need to go back to 18. Blanche was 25 years old and made the mistake of falling in love with a lawyer who lived nearby. He was older, had no fortune, and, to the horror of the aristocratic Madame Monnier, was a convinced Republican. In the matriarch's head, who adored the monarchy and the status quo, mixing the noble blood of the Monniers with a broke commoner was worse than death. The mother gave an ultimatum: break up with him or suffer the consequences. Blanche, in a rare act of rebellion, refused. She believed love would win. She was wrong. Love does not win against bars and padlocks. On a fateful night, Blanche was dragged to the attic. The windows were boarded up and nailed shut. The door was locked from the outside. Madame Monnier told her daughter she would only leave when she agreed to abandon the lawyer. Blanche thought it was a punishment of a few days, but days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And the lawyer, the man for whom she sacrificed her freedom, died mysteriously in 9 years after the captivity began. At this moment you would think, now that the motive is gone, the mother will let her go, right? Wrong. The lover's death did not bring freedom. It brought oblivion. Madame Monnier decided Blanche would stay there, no longer as punishment, but because now it was convenient to hide the secret. The routine inside that room was from a medieval horror movie. Blanche received only leftovers from her mother's meals. Pieces of cold, fat, stale bread, spoiled vegetables. She had no bathroom. She relieved herself in the bed itself or in a corner of the room, and no one cleaned it. Over the years, the feces hardened and formed a crust on the floor and on the straw mattress. This crust attracted rats. Huge rats that ran over Blanche's body while she tried to sleep. In her delirium, isolated from humanity, Blanche began to see the rats as her only companions. She talked to them. She shared her crumbs with them. Her mind, brilliant and gentle, began to fragment in total darkness. But what makes this story even more unforgivable is the complicity. Madame Monnier did not live alone. There was Blanche's father, Emile, who was described as a weak man submissive to his wife. He knew his daughter was upstairs. He heard her screams in the beginning, and then the weak moans. But he chose silence so as not to disturb the peace of the home. He died in 1880, taking the secret to the grave, without ever lifting a finger to save his own daughter. And there was Marcel, the brother, Marcel Monnier, the lawyer, the man of the law. He lived in the neighboring house but visited his mother constantly. He knew. He smelled it. He saw the degradation. But Marcel was the heir, and confronting his mother meant risking his inheritance. Greed spoke louder than blood, and we cannot forget the maids. Women who cleaned the house, who cooked fresh food for Madame, while knowing that 2 flights of stairs up, a woman was rotting alive. Money and fear bought everyone's silence. For 25 years, the Monniers' social life continued. They hosted dinners. Madame Monnier received virtue awards. They laughed, drank wine, and discussed politics in the living room, while the ceiling above their heads hid a concentration camp of one person. Did Blanche hear the laughter? Did she hear life happening downstairs, while her skin stuck to her bones? The psychological torture of hearing the world go on without you must have been as painful as the hunger. She was erased from existence, turned into a ghost that breathed, forgotten by everyone, except the rats and the mother who hated her. We returned to May 20th, when the officers finally managed to wrap Blanche in a sheet and take her out of that fetid room. Her reaction was pure terror. She screamed upon seeing sunlight. Her eyes, accustomed to perpetual darkness for a quarter of a century, could not process the brightness. For her, light was a physical aggression. She covered her face, curled in a fetal position, emitting guttural sounds that barely resembled human speech. Upon arriving at the Hotel dia Hospital in Paris, the nurses professionals used two diseases, death and war injuries, were shocked. Some had to leave the room to vomit. The smell impregnated in Blanche's skin was so strong that, even after the first bath, it persisted. When they undressed her, they saw the true extent of the damage. Blanche weighed. She was an anatomical skeleton covered by thin, translucent skin. Her hip bones pierced the skin because of pressure sores, wounds caused by lying in the same position for decades on a hard, dirty surface. Her fingernails and toenails had grown so long they curled like the claws of a wild animal. Her hair, which had to be cut, was a nest of parasites. But, surprisingly, in the middle of that physical horror, there were moments of lucidity. Blanche, after being cleaned and fed with a little broth her stomach could not handle solid food, smiled. She told the nurses how lovely the sun is. That phrase, spoken by someone who was deprived of it for so long, breaks anyone's heart. She had no hate in her eyes at that moment. She had only gratitude for being clean. While Blanche received the first human care in 25 years, the police turned their attention to Madame Monnier. The matriarch's arrest was a national scandal. The crowd gathered in front of the house on Rue de la Visitation, shouting "Monster," "Witch," and demanding justice with their own hands. Parisian society could not believe that that distinguished lady was capable of such atrocity. Madame Monnier was taken into custody, but her reaction was one of icy arrogance. She did not cry. She did not ask for forgiveness. She, dressed in her best widow's clothes, kept her nose up. In her twisted head, she was right. She was the mother, the head of the family, and had the right to discipline a rebellious daughter. She claimed Blanche was there by her own will, that Blanche was crazy and refused to leave. A pathetic lie to try to cover up the torture. But the justice of men is sometimes slow, and divine or biological justice can be faster. Madame Eloise Monnier, with a rotten heart but physically weak, could not handle the pressure. The shock of being arrested, seeing her reputation destroyed, and hearing the angry mob outside her cell was too much for her. 15 days after her arrest, before even sitting in the dock to answer for her crimes, she had a massive heart attack and died. She escaped the guillotine and life imprisonment. She died thinking she was a victim of circumstances, without ever paying a single day for what she did. With the mother's death, the eyes of France turned to the only remaining culprit, Marcel Monnier, the lawyer brother. The man who knew everything. The people wanted blood. The people wanted to see someone pay, and Marcel's trial would be one of the most frustrating and bizarre moments in French legal history. He would use the law itself to try to escape a morally obvious conviction. Marcel Monnier's trial began in a lynching atmosphere. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from all over Europe covered the case of the prisoner of Poitiers. Marcel, using his legal knowledge, mounted an audacious and revolting defense. He claimed he never exercised physical violence against his sister. He said Blanche was neurasthenic, hysterical, and suffered from putrid fever. According to him, she chose to stay in the room and refused to leave or eat. He painted himself as a concerned brother who did not want to force her into anything. But the most technical and cruel part of his defense was based on a loophole in the French law of the time. Marcel argued that there was no crime in the Penal Code of 1900, and one of failure to assist or private imprisonment by negligence within the family, he said. I did not lock her up. I just did not let her out. And believe it or not, the initial court sentenced him to 15 months in prison, but he appealed. In the appeals court, technicality won over morality. The judges agreed that, technically, Marcel had not committed any act of violence. He did not hit her. He did not tie her up. He only failed to act. And in the law of the time, letting someone rot was not a crime if you did not have the explicit legal duty of guardian. Marcel Monnier, the accomplice of 25 years of torture, was acquitted. He walked out of court a free man, under the boos of the crowd, but protected by the law's failure. He inherited his mother's fortune and lived the rest of his days as a recluse, hated by society, but free. And Blanche, what happened to the victim? Unfortunately, there is no happy ending here. There was no late marriage. There was no miraculous recovery. The 25 years of darkness broke Blanche's mind irreparably. She was diagnosed with several severe mental disorders, including anorexia, schizophrenia, and coprophilia, an abnormal attraction to developed by forced coexistence with filth. She was transferred to a psychiatric sanatorium in Blois. There, she lived another 12 years. 12 years clean, fed, but mentally trapped in that attic. Nurses said she was docile, gentle, but sometimes had terror crises, where she begged not to be locked up again. She never regained normal weight, never regained the beauty that was stolen, and never regained total lucidity. In 1913, Blanche Monnier died in the sanatorium, alone, at the age of 6. The woman who should have been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, died as a tragic footnote in criminal history. The Blanche Monnier case changed laws in France and many countries. The concept of duty to rescue and the criminalization of omission towards a person in danger were strengthened because of her. But that is little consolation for a stolen life. Blanche's story forces us to look at perfect houses, traditional families, and good people with a healthy dose of suspicion. Evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a concerned mother or a respectable brother. Blanche Monnier was a victim of those who should have loved her more than anything. If this story made your blood boil, if you feel the injustice in Marcel's acquittal, subscribe to the channel now. We bring the naked, raw truth, because oblivion is the only crime we cannot commit with victims like Blanche. Leave your comment. Do you think law or morality should come first? I see you in the next file of humanity's dark side.